Hey, what's up, masters? Welcome to another episode of Path to Mastery. And today we are actually with the master of storytelling himself, Mr. Pat Quinn. What's up, Pat?
Hey, it's great to be here. I always love talking to you about telling stories, and that's what we're going to do today.
Yes, absolutely. We're going to talk to people today about how they can actually use their story to create more sales and make more sales. So, Pat, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself first? I know you are one of the nation's premier presentation coaches, and I met you at an awesome workshop that we did for 2 days that just helped me tremendously. So, do you want to just give people a little bio and who you are, how'd you get started in this, and why they should be listening to you today?
Yeah, sounds good. Most people probably know me as a presentation coach, but I actually didn't get my start as a professional speaker. I got my start as a professional magician and worked magic for 10 years professionally. After that, I decided I needed to get a real job, so I became a public school teacher, and I taught high school math for 12 years. During that time, I picked up an advanced degree in how adults learn. And so I really bring two things to the table. The first is a little bit of stagecraft from my years of doing magic. And the second is a real understanding of how someone hears you when you speak. Whether you have an audience of one person across the table at Starbucks or 100 people when you're standing up and speaking to a group of people online or on stage, how is the audience listening, learning, and remembering what you're saying? I'm hyper-focused on your audience, David, because I only have one measure of success. My measure of success is not that people would come up to you afterwards and say you're a really good communicator. My measure of success is not that people would give you a standing ovation. My only measure of success is, does the audience want to take the next step with you? Does the audience want to go further with you? Whatever that next step is, whether that's to list a house with you or buy a product from you or sign up for your list, your group, your newsletter, whatever it is, does the audience want to take the next step? I've been fortunate over the last 10 years to work with some of the greatest speakers in the world. I work with Tony Robbins and Grant Cardone and Dean Graziosi. Tony and Dean, I worked with them on their KBB project. I work with Michael Hyatt and Jamie Kern-Lima and household names that everyone has heard. But most of the people that I work with are not professional speakers. Most of the people that I work with wouldn't even call themselves speakers. Most of the people that I work with are business owners and people who have something to offer the people that they're speaking to. And they want to attract more people, more clients, and have a greater impact on the world. And I believe becoming an effective communicator is the fastest, most efficient way to do that. And so I'm excited about today because we're going to help everybody get more clients, get more customers, and have a greater impact on their communities and the world through telling their stories the right way.
I love it. So what would you say? Well, first off, like if we break it down, what do you what are some of the attributes or the traits of great storytellers out there? Like,
Yeah, people who are using stories in the most effective way understand structure. They understand that there's a difference between the beginning of your presentation, the middle of your presentation, and the end of your presentation, and it's not random. There actually is a structure that creates a higher response, a higher conversion, a higher percentage of people who take the next step with you. A lot of people start their presentation by trying to be the smartest person in the room. I've got more facts and statistics than you do, and I think you're going to hire the smartest person in the room. Let me tell you, the smartest person in the room rarely gets the sale. The smartest person in the room leaves their audience overwhelmed and scared, and people who are overwhelmed and scared do not make decisions. They freeze. If you've been hearing things from prospects like, oh, I want to do this, I for sure want to do this, just not right now, or I have to go think about it, can I get back to you never? If you are hearing things like that, it's possible you're overwhelming your audience with information because you're trying to be the smartest person in the room. You also should not begin your presentation with your offer. You don't want to use the word program, system, products in the beginning of your presentation. And what I want you to do is be able to get a high conversion rate, get a lot of people to say yes to going further with you without you feeling salesy, without you feeling pushy, without you feeling like you have to take a shower because you just did something that wasn't truly in alignment with who you are and who you want to be. And I think the best way to begin any presentation is by telling your story.
Yeah, that was something I took from your workshop, which was fantastic. It really helped me a lot with my story, and I've been practicing. And so, right now we're in some interesting times, to be honest with you. We've got a lot of things going on, inflation, just everything. Prices are up. We got a war happening. We got stocks down. There's a lot of stuff. So there is a lot of uncertainty out there, right? And we were having this conversation earlier today, Pat, about, I believe that in these times, we need to up our game, our sales game. For salespeople listening to this, we need to be better. We need to show up better. We need to help people that are uncertain become certain, right? So how does it? Because you said the goal is to get the audience to take the next step. So if you're sitting in front of a home seller, it might be your audience, right? It could be that one person.
Sure.
So how important is this storytelling now, or are we talking stories, or are we talking sales skills?
Well, the structure that I talked about works whether you have one person in front of you or 100 people in front of you, whether you're online or on stage, whether you're in a boardroom or a ballroom or sitting across your desk or across the kitchen table from somebody. The first thing you want to do in our structure is to connect with the person in front of you. And the fastest and easiest way to connect is through telling your own story. There's 3 things you have to do early in any encounter with someone. In the first 5 minutes, they're going to make a decision whether or not to do business with you. You need to be ordinary, you need to be extraordinary, and you need to show your why. Ordinary means I'm just like you. I've worried about what you've worried about. I've struggled with what you've struggled with. Extraordinary simply means I've solved a problem that you still have. It doesn't mean that I'm perfect. It doesn't mean that I never make mistakes or I think I'm better than you. It simply means you still have a problem that I have a solution to. We've all encountered salespeople and people who are speaking to us who are too extraordinary. Like everything in their life is perfect. Their car is perfect. Their clothes are perfect. Their business is perfect. And at some point you're like, I don't know if I can work with you. I'm just not that perfect. I feel guilty every time I'm with you. We all have also encountered people who are too ordinary. They're just like us to the point that we think we might be able to do this better than you can. It's the person who can do both, who can both say, look, I am like you. I get what you're going through, but I also have a solution to a problem that you still have. And then the third thing you need to do is to show your why, to show that this is about more than making money, more than about getting one more client. There's a reason you're so passionate about doing this. There's a reason you've chosen to dedicate the next years of your life to helping people in this way. Let them see your why. And I believe the fastest and easiest way to be ordinary, extraordinary, and show your why in less than 5 minutes is through episodic storytelling. Episodic storytelling is not to read us your resume. David, I can assure you, nobody cares what your last 3 jobs were. They just don't care. Episodic storytelling is not to tell us your entire life story. If your story begins, I was born at a very young age, you're doing it wrong. And finally, episodic storytelling, most of the time, is not to share the most painful moment of your life with the other person. Remember, you just met this person. And so this is like a first date. You don't have to share everything in the first 2 minutes. As a matter of fact, there's some things that would be inappropriate to share in the first 2 minutes. Like on a first date, I don't walk into a first date and be like, hi, I'm Pat. I was in prison. Like you save that. Save that for a second date or a third date. We're going to be together a long time.
Maybe marriage.
Don't do it all. Don't do it all for in the first 2 minutes. So what should you share? You should share a story that has the person in front of you nodding their heads, saying that same thing happened to me. Your best story isn't a story that separates you from other people. And this is a mistake a lot of people make, David. A lot of people, when I hear them either in a one-on-one phone call or a one-on-one sales meeting, or when they do have the opportunity to present in front of a small group or a large group of people, they use the opening story to separate themselves from everybody else. I've sold more than anyone else. I have more of this than anyone else. I did this faster, better, stronger, at higher prices than anyone else in the world. And you're actually accomplishing the opposite of what you want to accomplish, which is to connect with the person in front of you. Look, I coach 2 different astronauts, guys who've been in space. I coach 3 different Olympians who've won medals. I coach a guy who's been to the top of Mount Everest, not the base camp, but the top. And when he tells that story, how many other people in the room with him can relate to that story? Nobody. It doesn't connect with anybody. Now, I coach another person who starts their presentation by saying that they argue with their spouse about whether the toilet paper should come out over the top of the roll or under the bottom of the roll. When he tells that story, how many other people in the room can relate to that? Everybody in the room. Ordinary stories are better at the beginning of your presentation than extraordinary stories. Your best story is the story that has the most number of people nodding their head saying that same thing happened to me. So if you're talking to someone and you know their kids are in Little League Baseball, why don't you tell a story about taking your kids to Little League Baseball? And they'll be like, oh, that same thing happened to me last weekend. That's the perfect story. Now you're connected. Now you have a dramatically better chance, close to 50% better chance of closing that sale because this person feels something in common with you. And the other alternative is to walk up to the person and be like, I've sold more homes in the last 2 years than any other living human being within 100 miles. Well, that doesn't connect with the person in front of you. What connects with the person in front of you is, man, I wish it would stop raining. I'm trying to plant a garden and it's all mud, if you know the person gardens. Find something that you have in common, or if you're speaking to a group of people, find something that you would share in common with everybody in the room, and you will connect quickly in a simple episodic story. And all episodic storytelling means is to take us into a moment, take us into a room where we can see what you see, hear what you hear, feel what you feel. And I'm telling you, you're going to connect faster and have a better chance of closing that sale simply because you started in the correct way.
So it's interesting interviewing you because you're answering questions that I'm thinking of asking you next, which is like the mistakes and it's cool. What's empathetic storytelling? Because that's a skill, right? Is that something that you're intentionally doing? You're thinking out like ahead of time. Like, is that intentional or?
Well, I think all great presentations overcome the first couple objections. And so, when I talk to somebody about being a presentation coach or about helping them with their stories, the first objection I think I'm going to hear probably is, oh, I don't want to be in a formula. And I don't have a formula. If you're hoping to get a formula here today, you've come to the wrong place. The second objection is, oh, I think you're going to try to change my style. I have a unique style, and I would never want to change your style. People ask me all the time, Pat, do you work with actors and actresses? And my answer is always no. Actors and actresses are doing the exact opposite of what I'm talking about. Actors and actresses are on stage pretending to be someone that they're not. I want you to be authentically and transparently you. And I believe that will attract the right audience of customers for you, and that you'll have more business than you know what to do with if you get out there and tell your story every single day.
So let's connect this to the salesperson. How important, Pat, is it because there's a lot of sales trainers that will tell you, don't get into the stories. You're there to, get to the point, get to the facts, close the sale. Do you think it is important in adding a story in that environment, or you think we just stick with the general sales tactics? Do you know what I mean? Or I might not even.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And this isn't my opinion. This is what the research shows. Research from Robert Cialdini, Daniel Pink, Scott Adams. Joseph Marks did his research specifically on making decisions during a period of volatility, which is exactly what you described that we are in now, David. And when you're in a period of volatility, personal connection is more important than anything in the decision-making process. We want to work with people that we trust and connect with. And so you can dive right into your sales techniques if you want, but you're going to have a much higher conversion rate, and you'll have a customer for life if you connect emotionally with that person. Now, you just said, tell a story, which is, we aren't telling stories for story's sake. We aren't telling stories to make people laugh or to make people cry. Criers are not buyers. That's not our goal. We're telling a story to show our audience that we have something in common with them, to show them that they can be emotionally connected to our story like we're emotionally connected to their story. And so we're in the middle part of our presentation, we're telling a story for a different purpose, to teach something to our audience. And at the end of our presentation, we're telling a story for a different purpose, to get a person emotionally ready to say yes. So I'm never a fan of just, oh, you should tell more stories. I'm a fan of making sure that you've collected the stories from your life that will work for you, that you've organized those stories by which ones are connection stories and would be good at the beginning of a conversation, which ones are teaching stories and would be good in the middle of a conversation, and which ones are emotional stories and would be good at the end of a conversation, right as I ask for the sale. And I think everybody should have a story journal or an electronic way to collect these, have them at their fingertips. So anytime you get on a sales call or you're going out to a meeting, you can kind of pick from your set of stories and say, this one would connect with this particular person the best. This one would teach this person, whatever I'm trying to teach today, whether that's to act quickly or to take advantage of the market right now, or to, make some simple improvements to get some big returns, whatever I'm trying to teach. And then this would be the best emotional story if I need one at the end to close. I think everybody needs a place to store those, keep track of those, and have them at their fingertips at all times if you're going to be the most effective salesperson that you can be.
Yeah, great advice. I created 2 stories since the event. So that 2 emotional stories. And
great.
So yeah, it's been awesome. What would you say, Pat, is the biggest mistake you see? Like I remember when we were at the event and, everybody was getting up and saying my closing percentage was like 10%, 15%. I think I said 10%. So what would you say is the biggest mistake when it comes to that with people either, selling from a stage, like one-on-one, I feel like I do a lot better, but getting up in front of a room that, my percentages had been lower. So what would you say would be some of the most common mistakes you're seeing?
I think the 2 most common mistakes I see, first of all, number 1 is not paying attention to your audience. You're so focused on what you're saying and what you wanted to present today and what you're going to try to offer that you're just completely blind to the audience, whether that's an audience of 1 on a call or on a Zoom or across the table at Starbucks, or whether you have a group of people in front of you online or in a room. My first piece of advice for anybody who speaks is to stop filming yourself and turn the camera around and film the audience instead. And you will learn more by watching the audience for 5 minutes than you'll learn watching yourself for 45 minutes. You'll learn the best part of your presentation and the worst parts of your presentation. You'll learn the most engaging parts of your presentation, the most boring parts of your presentation. And I think even like in a Zoom call, you should go back and watch the recording of a Zoom call and not watch yourself, but watch the other person. And pay attention to that other person while you're talking and see when they roll their eyes, to see when they lean forward and when they lean back, to see when they take notes and when they don't. And you will quickly find the most effective parts of your sales presentation and the least effective parts of your sales presentation simply by paying attention to your audience. The second mistake that I think people make is they don't keep track of their stories. For years, I kept track of my stories on little scraps of paper, Post-it notes, the backs of receipts, cocktail napkins. And I had them all in a folder. But honestly, I was one good gust of wind away from losing all of my stories. And then someone gave me a story journal, a book where I could keep all of my stories. And I loved it. I filled that with stories. The problem was it wasn't always with me. Sometimes my story journal would be in the car and I'd be in a restaurant. Or sometimes I'd be at work and my story journal would be at home. And so I'd write down my stories on Post-it notes and scraps of paper and on the backs of napkins. And I jammed them into my story journal. When I got my story journal, it was like 1 inch thick. And 6 months later, it was like 6 inches thick because I had all these scraps of paper in it. And again, I was one good gust of wind away from losing all of this powerful storytelling that I had. And so I thought, why isn't there a way to keep track of our stories electronically? I have a place to store my photos. I have a place to store my documents. And I have a place to store my music. Why isn't there a place to store my stories? And I looked all over for one and I couldn't find one. So I created one. We created a tool called storylink.com, STORYLINQ.com. Storylink.com is the one place to store all of your stories in the cloud. Anytime you have a story, you can enter it from anywhere in the world because this is cloud-based, and it will be captured there forever, regardless of how windy it is out today. And it is always with you because you can use it on your phone, you can use it on any computer. It allows you to categorize your stories by, this would be a great opening story to connect. This would be a great middle story to teach, or this would be a great closing story to fill the person with emotion. And then anytime you have a presentation to give, or you're going to be on a sales call with someone, you can simply go to storylink.com, choose from your own menu of stories, and print out the stories that you want to use that day, so you have them at your fingertips anytime that you need them. And I'm there step by step with you every step of the way with targeted video teaching to help you tell your stories in a better, more effective way to close at a higher rate. And so StoryLink, StoryLink.com is the tool that we made. And as a special offer today for everybody who's listening, David, we'd like to offer 30 days free of StoryLink.com. When you register, you can just use the discount code DAVID, D-A-V-I-D, and you can try it for 30 days. Put your stories in it, see if it works for you. If it works for you, you can keep using it at a low monthly rate. If it doesn't work for you, you can cancel your subscription, not pay anything. But I think StoryLink.com, StoryLink.com, is going to be a tool that a lot of your people are going to use because they want to close at higher rates. They want to close sales. They want to impact the lives of more people in their community. And they know that keeping track of their stories is an important step in that process.
Love it. So the two big mistakes are not paying enough attention to the audience, which I can see that as somebody in front of a room, especially when I was newer and getting in front of rooms, I was so worried about what I was going to say next and
exactly
everything else. And then not keeping track of the stories. Like just how many stories, Pat, should someone have, do you think? Like what's the average?
Well, it depends how many, if you're speaking mostly to groups, you don't need that many stories. You need good opening stories, probably 2 or 3 good opening stories. You need some teaching stories that will help you teach your content, and you need a couple of emotional stories. If you're doing mostly one-on-one work, there's no limit to how many stories you need, because here's the thing, you go through life and things happen. Funny things happen, teaching things happen, emotional things happen. And we often will think in that situation, oh, that would be a great story to tell the next time I have this situation. But we don't write them down. We don't keep them anywhere. Well, when you store those stories, then when you're meeting with somebody and you have a meeting with somebody and you hear a little bit about them, maybe your sister referred them or a previous customer referred them and they sent you an email that said, hey, Tom's going through a tough time. His mom just is battling cancer, but he needs help selling her house. Could you help him? Well, this allows you to go into your bank of stories and say, do I have a story that's similar to Tom's? He's got teenage children. Do I have a teenage children's story? His mom's battling cancer. Do I have a story similar to that? This is what he's going through. Do I have something like that? So if you're doing one-on-one work and you're closing people one-on-one, there's no limit to how many stories you should keep track of, because you never know when you're going to meet somebody where that story is the perfect connecting story. And you don't want that story to be lost to our memories, because if it's not right in front of us, we often don't remember it. For just a presentation itself, you don't need to change the presentation every time you give it. The presentation that you and I are working on, David, we're going to pick the best opening story for most of the groups, and you'll probably stick with it 90% of the time. We're going to pick teaching stories that teach the content that you want to teach, and we probably won't change those. And we'll have a couple of emotional stories at the back end. But when you're doing one-on-one work, keeping track of your stories is more important than just about anything that you do.
That's a big takeaway for me, because I have kind of gotten away from the stories. And I think, as you mentioned earlier, we're in these times where things are probably a bit more challenging, and it is more important, I would say, to
and you're not telling stories for story's sake. You're not telling stories like, 2 nuns and a priest walked into a restaurant. Like, you're telling stories in the beginning to connect. You're telling stories in the middle to teach, and you're telling stories at the end to bring out the emotion that you want the audience to have at the end, or the person who you're talking to have at the end. There's no random stories. There's no cul-de-sacs that we're going to go down that don't lead anywhere. There's no stories that seem out of place, or they're like, okay, well, so that dynamic that you talked about a little bit, David, which is like, get to the facts. Why are you telling a bunch of stories? These aren't long stories. They don't need to be 5 minutes apiece. But they are anecdotes. They're episodes, as we call them. That's why we call it episodic storytelling, because we're just going to share a short episode of something that happened to me this week that I can connect with you about, and that'll connect us and help us close at a rate that when we work with people. I worked with Damon John, and we changed his closing rate. It was on a free offer, but from 10% up to 60%. we've worked with real estate people and agents and doubled their conversion rate. We have the ability to figure out why you're not converting at the rate you want to be converting. And we know how to structure your presentations, your conversations, and your stories to make that happen.
Yeah. Okay. Amazing. So my thought with the stories, like, how does somebody, give us a couple for our listeners, give them a couple nuggets. Like, if they want to, like, how does somebody become better at stories? Like, let's say somebody really wants to figure this out and try to do it on their own without taking advantage of all the great things you have. What would they do? What would you tell somebody? Like, two things.
Well, I think the first thing you want to do is keep track of your stories. Second thing you want to do is when you're going to meet with one person or an audience of people, think of the stories I have now in my story bank. What story would connect to the best? What story would get the person across from me nodding their heads and leaning in?
Like I've been doing the whole time.
And then the third thing you want to do is just practice. There is I work with people all the time who don't feel like they're good storytellers, don't feel like they're good speakers. They're super nervous. I'm an introvert, and I work with a lot of introverts. There is no substitute for practice.
How much practice?
Well, here's my mantra: low stakes practice before high stakes opportunities, which means if you do get an opportunity to present at a local event, before you get that opportunity, which for many people would be a great opportunity because there could be 10 or 15 sellers in there that you want to sign up, or 10 or 15 buyers in there that you want to get to come to you. What you want to do is make sure that's not the first time you've told that story. I think the first 5 to 10 times you tell any story or give any presentation, you're just worried about remembering it in the right order. The next 5 to 10 times you do it, you're just worried about, am I moving right? Are my eyes open? Am I sitting down or standing up? And then the next 5 to 10 times you suddenly realize, hey, there's another person in the room with me. How are they responding to this story? And it's not until like 15 or 20 times of telling the story that you're actually comfortable with the material, you're comfortable with your body, and you're comfortable with how the person's going to respond. I think if you've seen somebody who's really good at this, and you sit back and whether it's watching a person, close somebody one-on-one, or watching somebody on stage give a world-class presentation, first of all, I can guarantee that it's not the first time they've done it. They had plenty of low-stakes practice before these high-stakes opportunities. And second of all, they're probably between their 20th time and their 100th time doing it. Like you're seeing the greats when you're at an event, seeing the great speakers of the world, or you're watching a closer really close well. They've done this 20, 30, 40 times before. And some of them, the classics have done it 200, 300, 400 times before. And you can get there, but you can't jump there. You have to remember the person who's world class at this had their first, second, and third time, and they weren't good. They were actually terrible. And the fourth, fifth, and sixth time, they were a little less terrible. And the seventh, eighth, and ninth time, they were mediocre. And the 10th, 11th, 12th time, they were pretty good. And then they started to get really good. And now there's somebody who everybody points to and says, wow, they're a natural. They're not a natural. They don't have any skill set that you don't have. I don't believe that the ability to close through storytelling and speaking is a naturally God-given skill. I think it's something that can be structured when you write it and practiced when you deliver it. And I can't make everybody who's listening to this a great speaker tomorrow. But if you're willing to work at this, practice at this, and screw this up a few times. My friend Jimmy Nelson always says, whoever screws this up first is going to win. And what he means by that is if you wait until it's perfect to do it, you'll never do it. But if you say it's not perfect, I'm just going to go out there and screw it up. I'm going to make some mistakes today. You're going to get better and better and better, make fewer and fewer mistakes each day. And 100 days from now, you're going to be world class at doing this.
Just like a professional athlete, you got to put it into the reps, put it into practice.
Absolutely.
And just listening to you, it's making me think about, we teach real estate agents how to outbound lead generate. And so many teachers will say, you need this script and you need to say this. And one thing I've learned over the last couple of years is there's this story we use with For Sale by Owners. And there's this property we sold on 15 Lakeside Ave in Shrewsbury. And all I have to do is say, hey, are you familiar with 15 Lakeside Ave on Shrewsbury? And they'll say, yeah, I kind of know where it is. And then I share the story of how we helped that person. And it's a game changer. Forget about scripts. Forget about all the, I mean, yeah, you need a greeting, obviously, but I'll tell you, it was a game changer when we started doing that. So, Pat, tell us one more time. And by the way, if you're listening to this, don't try to do it yourself. I went and I hired Pat. I got into his workshop. Do the same thing. It's a massive shortcut, compressed time. You want to be with a professional if you want to master your craft. Pat, again, what's the best way for them to take advantage of your story link?
You can visit the website at storylink.com. That's STORYLANQ, like Quinn, storylink.com. And if you use the discount code David when you register, you can get 30 days for free. Check it out, watch the trainings, enter your stories, and you're going to be well on your way to closing at a higher rate, connecting with more people, and having a larger impact on your community.
All right. Now I have to ask you this in the end, man. You got to end. You got to give us an emotional story to wrap it up. Can you do that for us?
Well, I think there's a lot of people out there who are having an impact on the world right now, but they're thinking small. And I know I was one of those people. I was thinking, I originally got into this by helping public school teachers tell their stories and tell stories better. And I was undervaluing myself and limiting my audience and thinking this is the only people who'd want to hear from me. And, I met a good friend, Pete Vargas, and he said, "You're thinking way too small." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "I think this is an offer for everybody in the world. And I think you can charge 40 times what you've been charging for it." And he was absolutely right. 5 years later, I'm reaching more people, I'm impacting more lives, and I'm leaving a lasting and positive legacy on this generation and the next. And I think that's true for everybody who's listening to this. There's a lot of you who are just thinking too small, and you've limited yourself with limiting beliefs on I can only do it in this area or with this type of home or this type of buyer or in this at this level of price. And I think there's a whole nother world out there available to you. I think listening to podcasts like this one, hanging out with people like David and swimming in a bigger pond, I just think you're on your way to bigger impact, to a bigger legacy, and to leaving a lasting and positive impact on this generation and the next.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that, man. Thank you. That was brilliant. And yeah, everybody check out Pat Quinn. And Pat, thank you for your time.
You bet. Thanks, David.